in your estimate of what the party wanted you to say. Winston was good at this kind of thing. On occasion, he had even been entrusted with the rectification of the Times' leading articles, which were written entirely in Newspeak. He unrolled the message that he had set aside earlier. It ran, Times 3/12/83, reporting BB, day order double plus ungood. Refs unpersons, rewrite, full wise, sup antiphony. In Old Speak, or Standard English, this might be rendered: the reporting of Big Brother's order for the day in the Times of 3rd December 1983 is extremely unsatisfactory and makes reference to non-existent persons. Rewrite it in full and submit your draft to a higher authority before filing. Winston read through the offending article. Big Brother's order for the day, it seemed, had been chiefly devoted to praising the work of an organization known as FFCC, which supplied cigarettes and other comforts to the sailors in the floating fortresses. A certain Comrade Withers, a prominent member of the Ingsoc party, had been singled out for special mention and awarded a decoration, the Order of Conspicuous Merit, 2nd class. Three months later, FFCC had suddenly been dissolved with no reasons given. One could assume that Withers and his associates were now in disgrace, but there had been no report of the matter in the press or on the telescreen. That was to be expected, since it was unusual for political offenders to be put on trial or even publicly denounced. The great purges involving thousands of people, with public trials of traitors and thought criminals who made abject confession of their crimes and were afterwards executed, were special showpieces not occurring oftener than once in a couple of years. More commonly, people who had incurred the displeasure of the party simply disappeared and were never heard of again. One never had the smallest clue as to what had happened to them. In some cases they might not even be dead. Perhaps 30 people personally known to Winston, not counting his parents, had disappeared at one time or another. Winston stroked his nose gently with a paperclip. In the cubicle across the way, Comrade Tillotson was still crouching secretively over his speakwrite. He raised his head for a moment. Again the hostile spectacle flashed. Winston wondered whether Comrade Tillotson was engaged in the same job himself. As himself, it was perfectly possible. So tricky a piece of work would never be entrusted to a single person. On the other hand, to turn it over to a committee would be to admit openly that an act of fabrication was taking place. Very likely as many as a dozen people were now working away on rival versions of what Big Brother had actually said. And presently some master brain in the inner party would select this version or that, would re-edit it and set it in motion. The complex processes of cross-referencing that would be required, and then the chosen lie would pass into the permanent records and become truth. Winston did not know why Withers had been disgraced. Perhaps it was for corruption or incompetence. Perhaps Big Brother was merely getting rid of a too popular subordinate. Perhaps Withers or someone close to him had been suspected of heretical tendencies. Or perhaps, what was likeliest of all, the thing... Do that again? Do you want to do that again? Cut it out. What was likeliest of all, the thing had simply happened because purges and vaporizations were a necessary part of the mechanics of the government. The only real clue lay in the words of refs unpersons, which indicated that Withers was already dead. You could not invariably assume this to be the case when people were arrested. Sometimes they were released and allowed to remain at liberty for as much as a year or 2 years before being executed. Very occasionally some persons whom you had believed dead long since would make a ghostly reappearance at some public trial where he would implicate hundreds of others by his testimony before vanishing, this time forever. Withers, however, was already an unperson. He did not exist. He had never existed. Winston decided that it would not be enough simply to reverse the tendency of Big Brother's speech. It was better to make it deal with something totally unconnected with its original subject. He might turn the speech into the usual denunciation of traitors and thought criminals, but that was a little too obvious, while to invent a victory at the front or some triumph of overproduction of the 9th three-year plan might complicate the records too much. What was needed was a piece of pure fantasy. Suddenly there sprang to his mind, ready-made as it were, the image of a certain Comrade Ogilvy, who had recently died in battle in heroic circumstances. There were occasions when Big Brother devoted his order for the day to commemorating some humble, rank-and-file party member whose life and death he had held up as an example worthy to be followed. Today he should commemorate Comrade Ogilvy. It was true that there was no such person as Comrade Ogilvy, but a few lines of print and a couple of faked photographs would soon bring him into existence. Winston thought for a moment, then pulled the speakwrite toward him and began dictating in Big Brother's familiar style, a style at once military and pedantic, and because of a trick of asking questions and then promptly answering them. What lessons do we learn from this fact, comrades? The lessons, which is also one of the fundamental principles of Ingsoc, that, etc., etc., easy to imitate. At the age of 3, Comrade Ogilvy had refused all toys except a drum, a submachine gun, and a model helicopter. At 6, a year early, by special relaxation of the rules, he had joined the spies. At 9, he had been a troop leader. At 11, he had denounced his uncle to the thought police after overhearing a conversation which appeared to him to have criminal tendencies. At 17, he had been a district organizer of the Junior Anti-Sex League. At 19, he had designed a hand grenade which had been adopted by the Ministry of Peace and which, at its first trial, had killed 31 Eurasian prisoners in one burst. At 23, he had perished in action, pursued by enemy jet planes while flying over the Indian Ocean with important dispatches. He had weighted his body with his machine gun and leapt out of the helicopter into deep water. Dispatches and all. An end, said Big Brother, which it was impossible to contemplate without feelings of envy. Big Brother added a few remarks on the purity and single-mindedness of Comrade Ogilvy's life. He was a total abstainer and a non-smoker, and had no recreations except a daily hour in the gymnasium, and had taken a vow of celibacy, believing marriage and the care of family to be incompatible with the 24-a-day devotion of duty. He had no subjects of conversation except the principles of Ingsoc, and no aim in life except to defeat the Eurasian enemy in the hunting down of spies, saboteurs, thought criminals, and traitors generally. Winston debated with himself whether to award Comrade Ogilvy in the order of conspicuous merit, and in the end he decided against it because of the unnecessary cross-referencing that would entail. Once again he glanced at his rival in the opposite cubicle. Something seemed to tell him with certainty that Tillotson was busy on the same job as himself. There was no way of knowing whose version would finally be adopted, but he felt a profound conviction that it would be his own. Comrade Ogilvy, unimagined an hour ago, was now a fact. It struck him as curious that you could create dead men, but not living ones. Comrade Ogilvy, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past, and when once the act of forgery was not forgotten, he would exist just as authentically, and upon the same evidence, as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. Sorry about my dog barking, that was really rude. Okay. I marked something over here, like as I was reading, but that was as I was reading, not before. So I don't know if I can find it. Which becomes aware of facts and ideas which still seem new and valuable after one is awake. The thing that now suddenly struck Winston was that his mother's death nearly 30 years ago had been tragic and sorrowful in a way that was no longer possible. Tragedy he perceived belonged ancient time to a time when there was still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. I guess that was it. Tragedy, he perceived, belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. It's weird to think of, like, tragedy being a thing of the past. That's very odd. I thought the woman tearing off her clothes was interesting. With its grace and carelessness, it seemed to annihilate the whole culture, a whole system of thought, as though Big Brother and the party and the thought police could all be swept into nothingness by a single splendid movement of the arm. That, too, was a gesture belonging to the ancient time. So that wasn't like sexual, right? That was more, he was more impressed with her enthusiasm and conviction. I wish more women had enthusiasm and conviction just in general. When there were no external records that you could refer to, even the outline of your own life lost its sharpness. You remembered huge events which had quite probably not happened. You remembered the details of incidents without being able to recapture their atmosphere. And there were long blank periods to which you could assign nothing. That reminded me of Black Mirror. Y'all help me out in the comments. Okay, I don't know the title. The one with the grain. The episode with the grain. It's like, so there's this episode of Black Mirror, you uncultured swine, where everyone has a what's called a grain. It's like a little implant right behind your ear, and you can replay memories like on a screen. You can replay them, you can enhance them, you can play them over and over again. It's really scary. But like that's kind of starting to happen now with so much overstimulation and overuse of phones, right? That was just really scary to me. Since about that time, war had been literally continuous, though strictly speaking, it had not always been the same war. That made me think of how the U.S. has been fucking shit up, one, forever, but two, American troops were in Afghanistan in 2002, and then American troops were in Iraq in 2003. And as far as I understand it, there are still troops in Iraq. Or Afghanistan, it doesn't matter, because it matters that there are American troops in a foreign country. There are American military bases all over the fucking world. It's disgusting. It's like we have been at war, right? There's been military interference in these other countries for so long. There isn't a time in my life where there hasn't been American military bases all over the world, and that's interfering as fuck. Gross. This part was cool. Who controls the past? Ran the party slogan. Controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. That actually made me think of another one of my favorite movies, Never-Ending Story, which you ought to watch. At one point in that movie, someone says, people with no hope are easy to control. Whoever has the control has the power. The doublethink shit, y'all, I'm gonna read that again in an American accent, because wow, that was fucking gnarly in a British one. Winston sank his arms to his sides and slowly refilled his lungs with air. His mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink, to know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever was necessary to forget, then draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself that was ultimately subtlety, that was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the fact that the hypnosis of the hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand doublethink, understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. What the fuck? What in the fuck? That is exactly, look what I wrote. What the fuck? Transcult 1000%. Because you don't know someone's sex, right? You don't know what their sex is until it's actually relevant. But then you have to pretend that you didn't know. You have to pretend that you didn't assume. Unfortunately, there was some construction at an apartment nearby recently, a couple weeks ago, and my dog has not been the same since, so that's a real problem. This part I thought was interesting. Big Brother figured as the leader and guardian of the revolution since its very earliest days. His exploits had been gradually pushed backwards in time until already they extended into the fabulous world of the 40s and the 30s, when the capitalists in their strange cylindrical hats still rode through the streets of London in great gleaming motor cars or horse carriages with glass sides. Y'all, I went to London for the first time in 2012. And if you imagine like a really stereotypical looking British man from like a Sherlock Holmes TV spot or some shit, those guys are actually walking around like for real. Like men wearing like you know, suits with tailcoats with the pointed tailcoats and bowlers and like smoking pipes. Like I thought that was cool, but at the same time it was like shocking, I guess. I don't know. I didn't know people still dressed in such a way. But it's interesting, right? Because the English are the OG colonizers, which is bad. Or is that the Spanish conquistadors? English are some of the OG colonizers. So that's good to remember. I was just talking about Americans, but we can talk about the English too. Okay. There's a lot of like anti-military stuff in this. I'm going to leave a link below, which is really cool because my friend sent me this link. That was the United States military trying to be all cool, being like, today is Memorial Day. Please leave a message about how the serving in the military has impacted you. And a bunch of people left messages, right? But they were all negative. They were like, yeah, my uncle blew his brains out, but he didn't even serve in the he didn't even serve. What fucking stupid ass language is that? Serve in the military? Fuck off with that horse shit. Are you kidding me? You serve in the military by getting on a plane to go kill foreigners. The fuck? So dumb. We don't all have the privilege of fighting in the front line, but at least we can all keep fit. Hello fucking hell. Okay, day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. Yeah, because you have to change the past in order to make it relevant to your point. It dumb, but people do that. Marsha P. Johnson, anyone? It was a man, by the way. He wasn't a woman. It was merely a substitution of one piece of nonsense for another. Oh, this made me think of tabloids. Here were produced rubbishy newspapers containing almost nothing except sport, crime, and astrology, sensational 5-cent novelettes, films oozing with sex, and sentimental songs which are composed entirely by mechanical means on a special kind of kaleidoscope known as a versificator. I'm going to start using that term because so many songs today, like, y'all, there's a formula for a pop song, there's a formula for a film, for a movie, there's formulas for TV shows. Everything you fucking know has a formula except YouTube. Pleased to meet ya. Everything has a formula that has to be followed. So these versificator songs are real, and they're on the radio currently, and, you know, all you have to do is have, like, a fucking computer and, like, someone who can't even sing, and you can just auto-tune their bullshit, and then you have voila, you have a versificator song. I think that tabloids, like, still sell. Tabloids sell probably better than newspapers at this point, which is really fucked up, but I guess typical. This is so weird because, like, this was written way before the internet. Any concept of the internet, any inkling of the internet even existed, right? So it's weird to see what this dude says, what he imagined, without there being any semblance, any beginnings of the internet, right? He did say that he wished he hadn't been watching television while he had written this book. But I think it was a significant connection. You know, I'm sure television probably influenced him in a good way, or maybe in an accurate way. But yeah, I mean, the fact that everything is still printed. Pornosec, it was called in Newspeak, engaged in the producing of the lowest kinds of pornography, which was sent out in sealed packets, and which no party member, other than those who worked on it, was permitted to look at. Now everyone can look at rape tapes on their phone. This whole printing thing is not really... I mean, it's still around, right? But it's not how everything is done. It's not how everything works. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.